Dr. Lockwood, welcome back for another fun episode. This is going to be super fun.
I think so too.
All righty. Just to kick things off, I mentioned to you earlier that I went to an event this evening with the Greenville County Sheriff, and some interesting stats were thrown out there. He mentioned that there's been a 75% drop in fentanyl in Greenville County in South Carolina over the past 180 days. It might have been a shorter time period than that, but with everything that is being done to attack and disarm the cartels across the board, there's been a lot less fentanyl entering into the state of South Carolina, and more specifically Greenville County. So there's a lot of that going on right now, which is kind of an intriguing topic. I know the majority of what we're going to discuss tonight is Greenland, but I wanted to know your thoughts on that topic to start things off.
On the effects on the fentanyl trade,
on the ultimately everything that's been going on with the cartels, the approach that the administration's been taking, it obviously seems to be having an impact. And that was I didn't statistically speaking, I hadn't heard.
It's practically undeniable that there has been a direct correlation between the Trump administration's attacks on the cartels and the actions at sea, and the U.S. is using its dominance, its superiority, its ability to project power globally, as well as protect its own hemisphere, particularly in the Caribbean, and it's directly against the greatest weakness of the cartels. They have nothing. They have nothing with which to oppose the United States, not in that regard. And so it's the Trump administration. This is an expression of the Trump administration and its new national security policy, affecting, essentially announcing its reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine, and a much stronger version of it. And the implications of that, of a stronger, more assertive United States within its own hemisphere, has other implications, some of which might be disturbing to some of our allies. It certainly should be a clear signal to our adversaries that you do not mess with the United States in its own hemisphere. You do not have the power, you do not have the global power projection capability. We have that superiority in our own hemisphere, and therefore we will properly assert for the national security interests and protection of our own people. We will take action against any entities that threaten to disrupt or endanger the safety of our own people.
There's just, with all of this stuff going on and all the information that we're fed through the news, I find it interesting that those are the facts that get ignored. It's like, that's what I don't hear. Those are the actual results, and everyone's being loud across the board, right? The president's being loud. Other politicians are being loud. Everybody's being super loud. But when you get down to it at a local level, you're a 75% drop in overdoses in fentanyl.
That's impossible to argue with.
That's incredible. It's incredible.
It's getting the results they want, just as the success of the Trump administration in shutting down the border.
Right. But I do like the Trump administration has accepted. They've discussed specifically the Monroe Doctrine. They've discussed our hemisphere. They've discussed our reasons for doing these things. And I think for a while there, it almost felt like they were trying to work around it and not discuss it as openly. And now they're being very open about it. And I think that's what a lot of people are appreciating. But it seems to be throwing everyone off. They're like, why are they being so open and honest about what they're doing? It's like, well, that's what the people have.
That's a change of pace.
It's a change of pace.
You like the change of pace? We're going to be honest with you.
We don't want Russia and China and we in this hemisphere, and frankly, we don't want them to have access to all these minerals and all these resources. And we also don't want the cartels to be able to operate in our hemisphere either. So,
do you all have a problem with that?
Yeah, right. Do you have a problem? But anyway, so very good to hear that news tonight, and also just makes me realize that a lot of what we're being fed is sensationalist BS.
This might be considered a resurgence of what used to be called yellow journalism. You might have seen that. Yeah, remember Mark Twain once said, "History doesn't repeat itself. It does rhyme, though."
Absolutely does rhyme.
You are seeing a resurgence of a 21st century version of yellow journalism, sensationalism. People basically newspapers taking the motto, "If it bleeds, it leads."
Absolutely.
Or you might rephrase the New York Times. Remember how the New York Times motto used to be, "All the news that's fit to print." Yeah, now it seems to be, "All the news that fits, we print."
Yeah. They're definitely printing all of it right now.
Yeah.
And it does create a bit of a chaos and chaotic environment for the average Joe who's trying to parse through all this information and come to a conclusion on
Yes.
any topic.
You go through the media, the huge amount of information that is out there, and trying to sort your way through it and make sense of it. Especially for me, I'm a career intelligence officer,
Right.
and I find myself using my skills to discern, to try and sift out what is disinformation, what is intended to manipulate, considering the source and doing very careful analysis to try and sift your way through it. Going through the information uh, sources that of today, it's like working your way through a minefield,
Right.
except that instead of a mine detector, you need a BS detector.
Yep. Yep.
And
Well,
so,
while we're still on this topic too, this came across my feed recently, but Biden had a $25 million bounty on Maduro's head when he was president, correct?
that's what I've seen also. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to fact check that as well. But it's obviously not just this administration. This has been going on for a while now, and it's interesting to me too. It's like when the job does get done, people get very upset about it not being done by their party. So
Right.
yeah. You also mentioned the Ukraine podcast earlier as well, so I want to allow a moment for us to go there too.
Yes, what I was saying on the podcast today, and my hosts were agreeing with me, is that Russia has reached a point where its offensive capability is breaking down. They are taking more casualties on the front, particularly the eastern part of the front with Ukraine, than they are able to reinforce and bring in through their recruitment. In other words, their forces are slowly shrinking relative to Ukraine. And Ukraine continues to build up its defense. Its drones are becoming more effective. They have been reducing the air defenses of Crimea. Now, you don't just reduce the air defenses of Crimea just for the sake of reducing air defenses.
Right.
You do that as a prelude to something else. In this case, it would be attaining the ability to obtain local air superiority over the over the Crimea. And that in turn is a necessary pretext to be able to launch a counteroffensive with whatever strategic reserves Ukraine has assembled. Once they've isolated the Crimea from reinforcement and logistic supply, and once they have been able to gain air superiority over Crimea, then they can launch a counteroffensive to force the surrender of the Russian occupiers of Crimea. And that would be a decisive operational defeat for the Russian army, one that the Russians will not be able to explain away. Oh, we really meant to do that? No, no, no. That would be something that has been forced upon them, and it will have significant political effects on the ability and willingness of Russia to agree to a ceasefire at a minimum,
Right.
and more than likely an armistice. The Russians may very well decide to declare victory and go home, and just say, okay, our special military operation has been a success. We're going to leave now.
Right.
And
Well, it's very clear that any kind of Russian involvement in, just example, like Venezuela, right? A lot of their time, energy, and effort is spent right now in the war in Ukraine. And if anything else, it seems to be keeping them from being able to focus on other fronts altogether because they
that's
are
true.
spending so many resources on that front.
And the thing is that Russians do not have the power projection capability that the United States has.
Right.
They cannot project their power by sea, and certainly not by air, into Venezuela. The United States has the United States has the bases. They have the superiority on the air and on the sea. And there's no way that the Russians could project any kind of meaningful power into that area to interfere or to support Venezuela. They're just out of luck. And they're really out of luck if they try to uh, really support any kind of operation outside of the Mediterranean
Right.
or even into the Mediterranean. So their allies in Syria, in Iran, they might as well just be isolated because they cannot really interfere with the United States support of Israel.
Right. Well, many fronts for us to discuss, and you mentioned Iran, so I guess I'll go there as well. My good friend still lives in Iran, and I have not been able to get in touch with him for the past now 4 days since they've pulled the plug on the internet. And
Mm-hmm.
this has happened before where they've done this. And he travels all over the place. He actually lived in the States for a while, but that's been there has been a little bit of news coverage, but not a ton because they've pulled the plug on the internet. I know that Starlink is operational, but they are apparently going door to door. And from the little bit that I've seen, taking Starlink and probably executing people, which sounds terrible, but that's what's going on across the board. Any thoughts on the Iran situation as well?
Well, the United States still has a free hand here. They have a free hand in doing whatever they think needs to be done in order to prevent Iran from disrupting the situation in the Middle East.
Right.
So right now, essentially the United States under the Trump administration has the strategic initiative in all areas, which is a rare thing. But in this case, the Trump administration has both the willingness and the capability to assert its power, to fulfill its national security objectives, and to reverse what it believes are certain injustices or inequalities
Right.
that were allowed under the past administration.
Right.
So what is shocking people is the fact that this president is willing to take action, far more, almost the exact polar opposite of his predecessor.
Right.
So that is what is shocking people. It's shocking our allies. It's definitely shocking our adversaries. And so I would say before you leap to condemn it, let's let it play out and see how these actions affect the overall situation. If it results ultimately in greater stability and a more favorable geopolitical position for the United States, that is totally in accordance with President Trump's motto of America First.
Yeah.
He is not trying to conquer the world. He is simply trying to counterbalance. And that, in turn, would be very much in favor, in alignment with what I proposed in my book, The Russian View of U.S. Strategy, as for the future of U.S. strategy. In that, I propose, and for our readers who are interested in taking a look at that, it's available on Amazon.com. It's always available for sale there. And in it, I proposed that the United States should strive to be the world's geopolitical balancer. And in much the same way that Great Britain was the geopolitical balancer to the continent of Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. It was able to preserve the peace for quite some time. And in the same way, if the United States uses its power not to be an empire builder, not to be the world's policeman, but instead to be the world's geopolitical balancer. In order for the United States to successfully do that, the United States must maintain global naval superiority, and also by extension, it must have space superiority. And that is why the U.S. Space Force, as we discussed in our Space Fleet episode,
Wonderful episode.
It would be such a useful thing. For the U.S. to be in the 21st century should be a primary sea power and a space power. Those two give you more flexibility. The air power is still useful as an adjunct to sea power. And ironically enough, not the least important, but the one where you can exercise economy of force is the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army does not have to be that large. It needs to be high tech. It needs to be well trained. It needs to be well equipped. It does not need to be that numerous. We can afford to reduce the size and transfer a lot of the active forces into the reserves so that those reserves, in case it does become necessary to expand the U.S. forces, they can be trained up, activated, and so forth. But you do not need to maintain a large standing army when you have sea superiority, space superiority, and a high-tech air force.
Well, the quick and decisive actions, I think, are the thing that's throwing people off, right? Taking a president out of the country before the country even wakes up is pretty impressive.
It is,
to say the least. Whether you agree with it or think it's overstepping or not, it's highly impressive. but I am curious to know what you believe to be overstepping at this point in these different arenas. And I think for me, I don't want to see another American boots on the ground situation in any of these countries. Personally, I understand that there were boots on the ground and there were special forces involved with the Venezuela situation, and there's obviously other government organizations and intel officers all around the world. I totally understand that, but I mean, openly putting boots on the ground for long durations of time, I don't think anybody wants that from our country.
The model, the proper model for this type of operation would actually have been Operation Desert Storm back in 1991. Yeah, where the entire war lasted several days,
right.
and President George Herbert Walker Bush, who we must say, I sometimes want to say George the Elder versus George the Younger, but in any case, he wanted President Bush was asked why he did not go all the way to Baghdad, because he stopped once he had kicked Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. The operations, the war's over.
Right.
He was asked why he did not do that, and the elder President Bush, he said something which reflected a great deal of wisdom and experience. He had been the head of the CIA. He had been a congressman. He had all this, one of the most impressive resumes to be president I'd ever seen. And what he said was, the reason he didn't go to Baghdad, he did not want to get caught in the middle of a civil war. He was right. His son should have taken the hint and not, in my opinion, not gone into Iraq, because that proved to be a totally unnecessary war. But in any case, what would be an example of overstepping, you say? Yeah. Well, that was the perfect segue. Well, before we do that, I'll tell you one amusing thing that occurred in this morning's podcast. I pointed out to my host about Vladimir Putin's name, the name Putin. Now, if you are familiar with Southern dialect,
yeah.
Can you see this coming?
Yep.
Okay, the word Putin, in Southern dialect, something the word "poot" means to pass gas. And when my mother, many years ago, heard that the new president of Russia was named Putin, she got a big case of the giggles. You're kidding.
Lost it.
She lost it. She said, Putin? Are you kidding? We're going to call him President Passing Gas? President Farting? President whatever? Yeah, President Breaking Wind?
I love it.
So I said, I told my co-host, because they got a big kick out of it too. And I said, we should make this go viral, make sure it gets to the White House so they can start calling President Putin President Passing Gas.
I mean, I can see it on the front of a shirt right now, and maybe maybe we should design it and then have you wear that on the next episode.
Oh yeah, you can design me a shirt that shows President Putin passing gas. The would-be president of the next Russian Empire, President Passing Gas.
I might, if you're okay with it, I might design a shirt and just have it sent to your address
there you go,
as a Christmas gift as well.
I'll pass you my snail mail address so that it gets to the appropriate place.
Perfect.
But in any case,
I was going to say this might be a good time to show off your UFO and cat shirt.
Let me stand up here.
This is fantastic. This is great. I love it. I love it.
There you go. Yep. Let's see. That may be a next gift. I'll make sure my wife knows about this.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be the only clip. That's going to be the only clip from the episode. People are just going to have to make of it what they want, whether they decide to watch it or not.
Yeah, really. So, but in any case, the fascinating thing is now, as we and I discussed offline, we've got a potential for a whole host of future show topics or things to discuss that would be of interest, both personally or professionally.
This gives me a very Project Bluebeam kind of episode vibe. That shirt does. I'm assuming are you familiar with Project Bluebeam?
No.
Okay, we'll discuss that one offline, and we will have an entirely different episode about that, and I'll have plenty of stuff to bring to the table. But basically, the powers that be decide to create a UFO alien invasion that's actually not real. They create it, and then humans believe it, and then we are um, uh, basically we then fall under their control because we think that aliens are attacking, but it's actually the powers that be.
This almost reminds me of look up the movie Wagging the Dog.
Okay. Okay.
Look at the premise of the movie Wagging the Dog. It's
Will
basically
do.
a very prescient movie which talks about media manipulation and how you can present a false narrative to manipulate events and manipulate public perception. But Wagging the Dog is very useful. And now I suspect what we've been wanting to talk about, the main focus, Greenland.
Great
Why
segue.
Greenland? Why Greenland? And now, as you've noted, we have noted from the reports, the Trump administration is meeting with representatives of Denmark to discuss the president's desire to acquire Greenland, and through economic means, potentially buying Greenland or any other means. And the question one naturally has to ask is why? What do we gain from physically taking control of Greenland? Because during the Cold War, all the way back to the beginning of the Cold War, and we have had bases in Greenland. The Danes have been happy to let us have bases in Greenland and have troops there, Air Force, Thule, Greenland. And so at one point, I think we had as many as 12 bases there. So, and during the Cold War, Greenland formed an essential block against potential Soviet naval expansion, trying to break out into the Atlantic. If you put Greenland and Iceland next to each other, and you have an effective defense there, Greenland was very necessary. And if the Russians and the Chinese seek to expand their power into the Arctic to attempt to claim resources there, Greenland would again become a very vital link, and that we would have to have. So I can understand the Trump administration's desire to have an increased influence in Greenland. And there is great historical precedent. It doesn't necessarily fit into the so-called manifest destiny doctrine of previous U.S. presidents, who believed that it was the manifest destiny of the United States to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific and have complete control in that manner. And of course, we did that mainly by means of purchasing. We had the Louisiana Purchase, doubled the size of the United States at that time. And then we had the Gadsden Purchase. You had, various other things. I believe we acquired Florida in a similar manner. We didn't conquer it. We bought it from Spain. And we have did most of the expansion of the United States through economic means, simply buying it from its former owners. We bought Alaska from the Russians, which the Russians are probably still very embarrassed about, considering what a bargain we got with Alaska and how that greatly increased our economic and our strategic ability. Right. So there are numerous historical precedents for the United States to want to see, because they see Greenland's desirability geopolitically, and they see it potentially economically, and they say, we would like Greenland to become a part of the United States and provide, it's not that you're going to see hordes of people moving into Greenland. You could. I mean, if you provided enough economic incentive to move to Greenland and develop it and do things like that.
Right.
And so there would be ample, but the thing is,
you think some of the New Yorkers could move to Greenland? I mean, there's plenty of New Yorkers moving down south. They could just move to Greenland instead.
Well, actually, the New Yorkers are moving down south because of the preferential tax basis, and also the weather. Yeah, you can't beat Florida. It's really
just
hard
get rid of the income tax in Greenland, and they can move there.
Yeah, there you go. And so this is but the concern of some people, and I can understand this based upon some of my sources, which I will not divulge, but I have been able to determine. I've learned that that in Denmark, the reserves, they are mobilizing their naval reserves. they're issuing them Arctic uniforms. And my sources tell me that the Danes are really furious, and they're doing this not against Russia or China or even NATO. They're they're doing it in opposition to the United States
Hmm.
because they are angry with how the United States is trying to apply pressure to acquire Greenland. So what the Danes are doing, they are quietly mobilizing their naval reservists and preparing to, if necessary, to deploy them to Greenland to provide some military operation, basically to force the hand of the United States. If the United States were to deploy military force of any kind to Greenland, and if Denmark, if U.S. troops somehow get involved in any kind of combat with Danish troops or Danish forces, guess what that does potentially? That activates Article 5.
It involves all
And
of NATO. Yeah.
they could get in. The United States could find itself involved in combat against some of its own NATO allies, especially if those NATO allies decided to come to the aid of Denmark. This creates a situation. Remember the Falklands War,
Yes.
1982?
Yes. This is my question, though, is it would activate Article 5, but if it's within the ranks of NATO, what occurs then?
If it's within, a situation can occur similar to the Cyprus dispute,
Okay.
where NATO acted against in order to resolve a dispute against a couple of its members, Turkey and Cyprus.
Great reference. I think I told you this before, but I studied in Nicosia and in Cyprus, so was able to go to the northern side and experience both sides of Cyprus. But great reference point.
Yeah, and so there are historical precedents for this sort of thing happening, but the Trump administration needs to be very cautious at this point and not play the military card, or not even don't even risk that sort of thing, because whereas there is a definite threat to be countered from, say, Venezuela or Iran or Syria,
Right.
and you can credibly employ military forces and identify a threat. There is no threat coming from Greenland.
Right.
There is no threat coming from Denmark. You have an ally in NATO. They have been willing to provide us bases.
Right.
There's absolutely no provocation that would justify the use of any kind of military force by the United States in order to acquire Greenland. And that would just be a bad diplomatic look all the way around.
So then why do we keep talking about it? If we already have these allies, we already have military bases there, we already have the protection, we already have everything we need, why does it keep getting brought up at this point?
Well, let's take a look at this from a geopolitical standpoint.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to recommend two things which will be of great interest for your viewers. I love audience participation.
Okay.
And this is a way where the audience themselves can take action and study these references and do this little exercise that I am going to bring up. First of all, I am going to recommend, well, other than my book, which provides the huge picture, the geostrategic picture of the United States as geopolitical balancer, you could see why the United States would want to acquire Greenland. But in a larger sense, there is another book that I did not write, but is by a fellow named Tim Marshall. The title is Prisoners of Geography. Look that book up and get it and read it. Because in that book, he has 10 chapters, 10 maps, 10 sectors of the world in which geopolitical and geographic considerations dominate their foreign policy actions. And once you read that book, you understand. Americans are notoriously bad at geography. And so this corrects that little problem. And you get an understanding of why each section of the world, all 10 that he discusses, and the United States gets its own chapter. Right. And so does Russia. And so the major powers get their own, and other sections get their due as well. And they discuss their unique advantages and disadvantages. So that is fascinating, but in order to give our viewers a tangible exercise, what they can do is, if you have you ever heard of the game of Risk?
Yes.
Risk has been called everybody's first war game because it is a very basic, but very structurally sound by Parker Brothers. You get the game of Risk, and once you have the game of Risk, you and your friends can get together and play a special scenario that I have developed. It's called the Trump scenario. And in the Trump scenario, you have 6 players, exactly 6 players, if you can swing it. Each each player has complete control of one continent. North America, one for North America, one for South America, Europe, Asia, the Africa, and Australia is considered its own continent. Those 6 players, the player that controls North America, the entire North American continent, is the Trump player. The North America in the game of Risk, North America includes Greenland. So you have Greenland as part of this North American continent that the Trump player would control. So in this scenario, then, each of the players, there are 6 players in a 6-player Risk game. They each get 20 armies that they can allocate within their continent in any way they wish. So because the continents are varying sizes, and the North America is going to have its own distribution that it needs to have. So you have those 6 players, and then you have what I call a diplomatic phase. Before the game begins, all 6 players can engage in diplomatic negotiations to try and form alliances, and before any actual military action starts. And in the Trump scenario, at the start of the game, after all the diplomatic negotiation has ended, the Trump player always moves first, has the first move, has the strategic initiative. And in the game of Risk, the North American Trump player gets 5 armies plus an additional 3 armies for the number of countries it controls. So he has an advantage of 8 armies, with which he could, if he wanted to do military action, has 3 choices. He can go east into Asia. He can go west into Iceland, because that's the only way he can to try and break up Europe, or he can go south into South America. Those 3 directions. But he has to make use of the diplomatic phase to form alliances and allocate his armies so as to provide the best defense overall. Now, that is not a perfect representation of the actual military situation, but it does show you the major dynamics that would be involved in any diplomatic or geopolitical moves. And by playing through that scenario, the American people, and by reading Prisoners of Geography, you gain a unique understanding of what is actually going on. The Trump administration is saying America first. They want to have dominance in their own Western Hemisphere. So they're not looking at being dominant in Europe or Asia or Africa or whatever. They want to maintain the balance. So this is where you get this interplay of strategies. And the game of Risk, appropriately modified, can show you and illustrate for you how these factors can play out. So that is what I would recommend to our audience. If you want to gain a greater awareness and be able to make legitimate, informed, intelligent criticism, especially after reading Prisoners of Geography, and then you can expand upon it from there. But this is the way to make the American electorate more literate, more aware, more informed, and make more intelligent observations about what is really going on and why the Trump administration is doing certain things and should it be doing certain things. And again, at this point, I would say that the Trump administration is justified in showing great interest in Greenland. They are justified because of their history and because of the way they have expanded before. They are justified in making an offer. This would be a real challenge for President Trump to make a deal that is attractive enough to Denmark to be willing to cede effective control of Greenland to the United States. That's a big chunk of land to give up. And go ahead.
Well, I'm assuming a lot of conversations were had behind the scenes.
Oh, yes.
right? Before he got as loud as he's become. And it seems to be, once again, this is my observation, that he only gets loud when he needs things to start moving more rapidly. So the louder he becomes means that more is happening because he's not necessarily getting his way. Once again, just an observation. And therefore, he brings a lot of attention to the matter, which puts a lot of pressure on certain entities. And now
Yes.
it's putting a lot of pressure on Denmark on the international scale, at an international level. And but that's just my general observation of Trump, is whenever he wants something to happen, he starts to talk about it openly so that everyone kind of knows what's coming, but he's doing it in his own way. He's bringing a lot of attention to it. He's putting pressure on those individuals and those powers. So, to your point, it seems as though an offer is coming. I'm sure an offer has already been made, but it sounds like they rejected that offer pretty aggressively behind the scenes. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and just based upon the military action, the military actions that I've learned about from my sources,
Right.
you have the mobilization of naval reservists, issuing them Arctic uniforms.
Right.
Basically, they are willing to. The Danes are willing to put themselves in harm's way, especially the military, especially in Greenland. And if a military action or clash does occur, you may have something like the Gulf of Tonkin incident that triggered greater U.S. involvement and created a greater justification for U.S. involvement in Vietnam. That would be disastrous if it turned out to be that kind of thing. But it would not be a very good look for the United States to arbitrarily use military power in a situation where the nation in question against which it used military power poses no threat whatsoever to the United States. Right. It would be difficult to make that case that Denmark and Greenland are somehow threatening our security.
Right.
They are a desirable acquisition if we could persuade them to do that, but
they're not.
We have to. So we would have to be able to set. We have to be willing to settle for half a loaf, right, rather than try to get the whole loaf of occupation, because it just simply would not be worth it.
Well, and I guess what the question is, what is a half a loaf, right? What does that look like? Because we do have military bases there already, and we have a great relationship.
We have the military bases, and we might want to assert any kind of deal which enhances our ability to deploy if necessary. That would be desirable.
Right.
If Greenland has certain natural resources. If they had, if it turns out that they had rare earth minerals,
right,
that would be another very lucrative deal, because the U.S. does need rare earth minerals in order to operate its high technology. So there are, and those are developments behind the scenes which we should pursue. There is something we don't want to conduct all of. We don't want to conduct all of our operations in the open. That's like playing poker with all of your cards face up.
Yep.
and you don't want to do that. And so this is
of those reasons, though. What do you think that the top three reasons, geographically speaking? We know it's the connection to the Arctic, and obviously the fight against China and Russia and other powers be. But aside from the positioning of Greenland, what other primary reasons do you think make sense? Minerals, military bases,
resources, military bases. Yeah, not merely the possession of Greenland itself, because Russia does not. For example, the only reason to physically occupy Greenland to a total extent would be able to was if you were thinking that Russia is somehow going to attempt a naval breakout into the Atlantic, which is what was the concern was during the Cold War. Having those bases in order to be able to block any particular expansion of the Soviet Navy into the Atlantic, because during the Cold War, the Soviet Navy's operational concept was essentially to be a sea denial Navy.
Right.
The purpose of the Soviet Navy is to destroy the United States Navy, and they had something of a capability for doing it, but not totally convincing. They never had the ability to logistically project and realistically project power into the Atlantic or project it globally in the sense that the United States could then and still can do now.
Right. So, what do you believe to be the next step with Greenland? What do you think happens next? If we release this episode in 3 days, what?
We have the potential to have great. We either look brilliant or we have great amount of egg on our face. This is what is life without risk. In this case, the board game.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, in any event, the next step, guess from what I'm seeing, the Trump administration is going to try and ratchet things up, in terms of economics. President Trump loves to make deals. He loves to make really good deals. He was frustrated in that attempt. He has been frustrated in that attempt to make a deal to stop the Ukrainian war. Now here, where you have a friendly power, he wants to come out with a deal that ideally the Danes will like, the Greenlanders will like, and that our allies can accept, that we're not arbitrarily throwing our weight around. And so you are going to see more vigorous diplomatic and economic activity behind the scenes, a lot of trips back and forth, trying to make the deal attractive enough to the Danes. It says, okay, yeah, we can live with this. This is good for Denmark and good for the West, and it becomes a very delicate diplomatic and economic balancing act. It will challenge the negotiating skills of the Trump administration. So we will see if they have learned their lesson that there are some powers that you cannot make deals with, and there are some powers that you should not make deals with. But where it is possible, you want to ideally have a win-win situation where all parties get something that they would want or desire. So I would say more diplomatic and economic activity. I will be dismayed, and based on the indicators that I've seen, that based on the fact that the Danes are in fact mobilizing their naval reservists, and they are upping the ante as best they can on their side. And what we do not want to do is act in an arbitrary military fashion where no military threat is presented.
Right. Right. I'm glad you say that now too, and especially we don't know what's going to happen next, and hopefully there is no clash. Hopefully there are no shots fired between militaries, because it would not be good for anyone. But I think that's the point where both of us are sitting here and giving kudos and applauding Trump where it is necessary, but also at the same time being critical of a potential overstep here, right, as well, and a move that would not be good strategically for the U.S.
No,
at the end of the day.
We would not gain anything from overt military action at this point because no threat is presented. We would not be able to. No amount of spin would be able to justify use of military force against a nation or countries that have no real capability to threaten the United States,
right,
for one thing, and really there's no intent. Now the Danes have certainly indicated through their mobilization that they are willing to defend themselves, and they are very upset with what they perceive as unnecessary use of force or aggression,
right?
And so you can see it from the Danes' point of view,
and also rightfully so.
They're fully justified in saying
right.
that. Say, look, we're not posing a threat to you. So can't we talk this out? Can't we come to a real, honest, and equitable deal? And presumably, the Trump administration should be able to do just that.
So here and now, we can make it very clear that if military action is taken against the Danish military, we are openly. I'm openly critical, and do not agree with that move at all.
I could not endorse that kind of action because there simply is no strategic justification for it.
Right.
And it would.
That's where we draw the line. At least we know where we know what overstepping looks like with Greenland. If a good deal is made, nobody agrees to it and comes to terms, sure. But if military action is taken against an ally, nobody wants that to happen.
This would be like Argentina taking action to regain the Falklands.
Right.
That forced Great Britain to take military action and project its power. Although it was no longer an empire, it still had enough military capability and enough of a navy and enough military force to successfully defeat an Argentinian attempt to retake the Falklands.
Correct. That was a pretty quick.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It was not a protracted affair. Once Great Britain, once Great Britain demonstrated through its naval and air forces
Yeah.
that there was no way that the Argentinians were going to be able to retake the Falklands.
Greenland's a little bit bigger than the Falklands, though.
Yeah, Greenland's a lot bigger than the Falklands. It's also a lot colder.
It's a lot colder. It's a lot colder.
You know, although the United States military does have forces capable of operating in cold conditions.
Those are military personnel that are not going to be very happy after a few weeks.
No.
They're not going to be very happy. No. Unless they are already a human cyborg hybrid of some kind that we discussed on our last podcast, and they can withstand intense cold.
Well, we'd be sending humanoid robot. Actually, we'd be sending AI robots into Greenland. We'd probably prefer doing that.
I don't think the special forces care to go there.
No. They are not hankering to go to Greenland. That is not one of their. It's not one of their garden spots. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to go on leave?
Yeah, I don't think $100,000 raise is going to help any special forces member want to go there, stay there for a long period of time.
Yeah, morale is going to sink
rapidly. That's something you have to take into account too. I'm sure you've taken into account many a times with the war game simulations you've conducted, or been a part of.
Well, with the war game simulations, let's see. One of the ones that I actually war gamed on my own was when I was examining the German Ardennes offensive in World War II. And this is a strange story, but I had did a simulation in which I instead of using the two Panzer armies that the Germans had mobilized for the Ardennes offensive against the Americans, instead I used them against the Soviets, and used it. The purpose was to attack the Soviet army advancing west. Had cut off the German 19th Army in the Kurland Peninsula, right bordering the Baltic.
Yep.
And so that was a significant force that they'd cut off. What I did in my little war game simulation, I used the two Panzer armies in a counteroffensive along the Baltic coast to create a corridor to enable the 19th Army to withdraw west and join the rest of the main force. And then you basically reform and you create a more solid front against the advancing Soviet armies. Basically, you hold them out of Germany. In the meantime, in the West, you basically say, okay, you would basically surrender to the Americans, the British, and the French. You would, if you're German, you want to surrender to the Americans first, the British second, the French third, and never surrender to the Russians, because you would know what would happen. So in that, I had taken that plan, and it worked pretty well. It basically, enabled the Germans to hold the Soviets out of Germany, out of German territory, until they could surrender to the other Western allies. Now, the way this came up again is when I was in Germany in 1986. They had a German-American Friendship Day, and I had volunteered to be one of the Americans to be paired up with some German dignitary or guest for German-American Friendship Day. As it turned out, the person I was paired up with was a retired German field marshal, Heinrich Henrizi. It was considered, I looked him up, and he had been heavily involved in fighting on the Eastern Front, and he was considered the Germans' best defensive specialist on the Eastern Front. He was involved in the defense of Berlin, and I was assigned to him. Now the American commanders, the American generals, they did not know of my extensive background they knew I was an intelligent. They knew I had a PhD.
Right.
They knew I could speak German fairly well, and so they assigned me to Henrizi. And so I met uh, Marshal Henry. I greeted him in German. His face lit up because now he had been nominally part of the SS, but again he retired, and they didn't throw him in jail. They didn't do anything like that. He had kept a very low profile. But anyway, I had met this fellow and I greeted him in German, and then we started talking in English about. And I told him that I had extensively studied the Eastern Front, and I told him about this war game that I conducted and so forth. Told him my plan and how it would have worked, and his face lit up. His face lit up. He says, "Yes, yes, that would have worked." And that's a high compliment coming from a
That
retired field marshal.
I that is a compliment. I am curious to know. Was he? So he. This was in the States, correct? You were not this. He was
We were in
in America
Germany.
this time, or you were in Germany at the time.
I was stationed in Germany.
Okay,
I met him in Darmstadt.
got it. I was going to ask if he was a part of like the Operation Paperclip situation.
No, he was
Okay.
not part of Operation Paperclip.
Okay.
He was a retired field marshal, and he had married an American. He had an American wife, 50 years his junior. He was 86 at the time, and his
Wow.
friends. Uh, and he he said, and I marry Henrizi. So anyway, I we spent after I told him about that operation, we spent the next couple of hours chatting happily like two equals about tactics on the Eastern Front and military operations because I had studied all that stuff and war gamed it. And so we had a fascinating conversation for a couple of hours, and then we went on our merry way. And about 2 or 3 months later, I met in Darmstadt his widow, Mary Henrizi. Unknown to me at the time, he was dying of stage 4 cancer. He was on his last legs. I didn't had no idea this was happening. But Mary, his widow, told me that her husband had come home from German American Friendship Day, and he was happy because for years he had been convinced that the American leadership had no respect for him whatsoever. None whatsoever. They just thought he was just this old Nazi, retired Nazi, and so forth. He says, but then I went there and they gave me this American officer who spoke German, and also he knew all about the Eastern Front and military. And we discussed this war game, the strategy. So he was wild about it. And essentially, she said he died happy because he felt that at last the Americans were respecting him. And it is probably one of the strangest acts of grace by God because we don't know what goes through a man's mind in the days and hours before his death. For all we know, he could have repented. He could have become a Christian in his last days.
Right.
We don't know that. I may find that out. I'll probably find that out when I eventually get to heaven.
Yeah.
But that is one of the strangest acts of mercy that I've ever seen.
It's as much of a compliment as I know that is to you. It is also just strange thinking of it as a compliment coming from a prior Nazi, right? It's almost it's a weird way of like mentally wrapping your mind around an individual who was a master strategist in his own
Right.
right, but he was at the same time he still a Nazi, and so you're just kind of
Yeah.
like, well, I want to accept it as a compliment. It absolutely is a compliment, but at the same time, still a Nazi. So
Yeah.
there's
He was
this.
he was defending Berlin. He was trying
Yep.
to keep the Russians out.
Yep.
You have to take into the context of those events. But it was
Absolutely.
one of my very unusual experiences in this life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I once again, I hate to be that person, but that's just what's going through my brain too. As well, we're sitting here talking about this as well, and I think about like Operation Paperclip when
Yeah.
all of the Germans that came over and
It made our space program possible.
exactly, and all these things that happen, and you're kind of just like, well, I want to be critical, but at the end of the day, so much good has come out of these things too. That you could a lot of bad, but also a lot of really great things. I mean,
Yep.
America as we know it is a result of us being able to attract assets, intelligence assets, scientists, etc., and utilize them properly. And I think about it with like immigration as well. Like Once again, they were an individual, they were in a country, they were hyper intelligent, and they were utilized for their skill sets and their intelligence at that
Right.
time. We don't know their reason for doing all these things, but other than they might have been killed had they not served in certain positions, and or they would have been ostracized from society. So you end up serving in whatever capacity. But I think about that all the time, about the incredible people, the incredible brains that happen to be born in different parts of the world and end up getting associated with organizations that might not be the best organizations, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make them any less of an impressive human being, to say the least.
Yeah. So, in any case, but this is a strange world that we live in now.
Yeah.
That we have all of these events taking place, and you can trying to look at President Trump, who is visibly struggling
Right.
with his spiritual status. He says he's not sure he's going to get to heaven. Now, he doesn't. What he does not understand, what a lot of people do not understand, is that when they think about heaven or trying to get to heaven, they think that they have to do this somehow through their own efforts. They misunderstand the crucial fact that they misunderstand John 3:16.
Yeah.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
Yep.
It doesn't say anything about earning your way into heaven.
It's not for us to decide.
It's not for us. We don't decide that. We can't decide about whether or not we're going to be able to get into heaven.
Yep.
It is a gift of God. It is a gift of grace. And then everything you do after that is supposed to show your gratitude for what God has done for you. That is the purpose of good works, not to earn your way into heaven, but to show your gratitude to God for having made it possible for you to get into heaven without having to work at it, because no one can do that.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's another fascinating little twist. I'm waiting for someone to maybe we can get this podcast to President Trump. Says, "Hey, Mr. President, you don't have to earn your way into heaven. It's a gift, doggone it."
I love it.
It's a great deal.
As much as I want to end the episode on that note, because I think that's a very high note to end the episode on, I do want to just wrap things back around to Greenland, because this will be labeled as a Greenland podcast.
There you go.
So with Greenland in mind, is there anything else that you'd like to bring to the table? Any other information that you think would be helpful for people as they are trying to understand what's going on, aside from playing your game of Risk and reading it, which I'm going to go ahead and drop in The Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall into the show notes also. But is there anything else that you'd like to share that in your research and of all of your wisdom and knowledge that you think would be helpful for people to know?
Well, the greatest thing for people to keep in mind is that this is a very dynamic military, political, and economic situation that is going on. We have a very activist administration that is taking the strategic offensive. They are not sitting back on defense. They are using U.S. military, diplomatic, and economic power to the greatest extent that they can in order to further and strengthen American interests. America first, they take that very seriously. The American strategic interests first. It doesn't mean that we neglect or mistreat the rest of the world, but we cannot be of help to the rest of the world if we ourselves are insecure, disorganized, and don't have our own backyard in order. We have to make sure that we are strong first, then we are in a better position to help the rest of the world on an as-needed basis. Right. But that is really the thing we have to understand. And in order to do that, this administration perceives that the previous administration and Democratic administrations have left us in a very weakened strategic position. They are taking steps to correct that, both economically, militarily, and diplomatically. So it's kind of like watching. It's kind of like making sausage. It's probably best if you don't watch the process too closely. So
because it can be confusing too.
yes, it can. So, why are they doing that?
Why is that happening?
Yeah.
I do want to give you my last comment and question of the podcast Today it is January 13th, 2026. It is right now 8:26 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Greenland aside, I have an Iran question for you, because I released an Iran episode. I think it was 5 days ago. But basically,
Okay.
my friend sent me all of his thoughts on the history of Iran and what was currently going on there, and in the feelings and the emotions of Iranians currently. And I just told him I would read it, so I read it and I released it. I am curious to know what you think is going to happen over the coming days, because it seems like the military escalation on our end is growing bolder and bolder and bolder with every waking moment. So,
Hmm.
do you think there is a decisive action that will be taken?
Well, certainly not invasion.
Okay.
It would be absolute suicide for American forces physically to invade Iran. If you look at the geography of Iran, and of course, Tim Marshall's book would be very helpful
Very
for that
mountainous,
too.
too. Yeah.
And it's very mountainous, and I don't care how high tech we are. Yeah, the mountains of Afghanistan proved to be enough of a challenge for us.
Yeah.
We are not used to that kind of warfare. It is not our strong point. And so we have it as a partial contingency, but it is not something that we do best. That would be like that's kind of like taking a star running back and using for nothing but line plunges into the center of the defensive line
Right.
instead of making use of the speed and agility.
Right.
So there are things that we do well, and so long as we stick to the things that we do well and structure any military operations around those strengths, the better off we are. Going into Iran, other than using bunker busters to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities is one thing. Okay, that we do well. Using air power, assisting our Israeli allies in their special operations. Okay, that's another thing we can do without getting embroiled. But the last thing we want to do is get embroiled in any way in a prolonged conflict with Iran, and especially one that would entail American casualties. That is not something we would want to do.
I agree. From everything I've seen too, it seems like there's a lot of Mossad agents on the ground too that they are capturing in Iran currently too.
So why do what Mossad is doing far better than we can? So I mean,
Yeah.
they're the ones who know their enemy. They have a more direct vested interest in stopping Iran
Right.
than we do. It is in our interest to aid Israel economically, militarily, to our advantage. We can do that, and let the Israelis decide how they are going to do it and to what extent.
This is an entirely different podcast altogether, but I think the amount of involvement and the frustrating part for the majority of a lot of I say majority, a lot of Americans nowadays too, is that we feel like we're being drawn into these conflicts by Israel. A lot of Americans feel that way. See a lot of that online. And to your point, they are doing it, and they've been doing it for a while, and they do it a lot better. So support them in doing that, sure. But
Exactly.
I think Americans draw the line at, we don't want to actually get involved in your war. We operate in our hemisphere, and this is where we are. So let's continue to do that. Let's not allow ourselves to be pulled in every direction, just like Iraq and Afghanistan, which obviously did not end up well for us.
Yeah, they can act as our proxies, but we are not going to act directly on their behalf.
Right.
That's the
Right.
distinction. That is the essence of being a geopolitical balancer,
Right.
rather than trying to be a world policeman.
Great note to end on there. Anything else, Dr. Lockwood, that you'd like to add to this episode tonight?
Go Hurricanes!
Yeah.
Hey,
Big game coming up. I'm sorry, but Indiana is going to absolutely destroy them. They've had such a run.
I have to disagree. I have to disagree with the old axiom that defense wins championships. It's going to be a contest of Miami's defense, which is obviously national class,
Yep.
versus Indiana's offense. It's like the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object. Which one's going to prevail? It's going to be close. I think that will be. I think it will be quite close. But this will be the fifth time that University of Miami has had the opportunity to play for a national championship on its home field. Yeah, the previous 4 times were the Orange Bowl.
Yep.
Now that's gone, but now it's at Hard Rock Stadium. So they will have the the home field advantage for a college football national championship. I mean, that's if anything gives Miami even a slight edge, it
That's it.
would be that.
That's it.
So
Sure.
that will be fascinating.
I'm sure Indiana. I don't know Indiana fans at all, but I'm sure Indiana fans travel well though,
Oh yeah,
especially for a national championship.
oh yeah. I think they'll get motivated.
Yeah,
I mean, how long has it been since Indiana's been in a national championship?
I couldn't tell you.
Like forever.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. Could not
Yeah.
tell you. Well, wonderful. Best of luck to your hurricanes. Hopefully they do well, but I have no dog in this fight. I don't really care either way. But the best of luck.
I don't have any huge betting money on riding on the outcome. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not exactly don't have that much discretionary income to toss at things like that.
A couple of UFO and kitten shirts, maybe, but
Oh
no.
yeah, that I can spare. I've got my priorities.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dr. Lockwood, thank you again for the time this evening. I always appreciate your assessments, especially with everything that's going on. It's a lot for everyone to consume. That we are bombarded with information, so for us to be able to receive this in a more concise manner, I think is really, really helpful to people, and hopefully a bunch of people get great value out of this episode.
Well, I hope so too, and I hope that I provided some convenient and the tools might actually be fun for them to use. And I said, oh my goodness, yeah, imagine having fun while you're learning.
I
But I
absolutely
think I've
agree.
given some and having a greater insight on what is actually going on. I think it'll be interesting if this thing actually goes viral and what other people have, what comments they have on these sorts of things.
Well, it
And I'm
might
sure
be
I'm
it
sure
might be
Tim
the
I'm sure
UFO.
yeah
Sorry.
I'm sure Tim Marshall will appreciate the increased sales.
I'm sure he would appreciate the increased sales, and I feel like we might need to auction off a UFO and cat shirt on the next episode,
There you go.
just to
All right,
just to support the cause. All right, well, enjoy your evening, and we will talk very soon.
excellent. Thank you. You do the same.